Hello ladies and gentlemen, and today I would like to present to you two stories apparently based in the realm of reality. These are simply two stories based on true stories. We got Shadow in the Doorway, which will be followed up by another narration of the story Safe. If you listen to the very end, I'll give you two other recommendations for videos, as well as an insight to a project I might be starting very soon. So please, sit back, relax, and prepare to be scared as we delve into two stories that may be fact or fiction. This is Creepypastas. I love myths, urban legend, paranormal stories, and the chronicles of unexplainable mysteries and phenomena. As a kid, I actively sought out books and articles on the topic, no matter how vaguely related. 20 years on, I still enjoy delving into the stories of the unknown, whether it's ghost hunters or ghost adventures, or even just the odd conspiracy theory or two online. The difference between now and, say, 20 years ago is that I didn't have access to the wonderful invention of the World Wide Web. These days, I literally have a world full of myths, legends, and stories at my fingertips, so I often enjoy Googling these things, if you will, deciding to absorb as much information as I physically can. I am intrigued by the unknown. It means that there are things yet to be discovered, and mysteries yet to be solved. And perhaps if I read enough of these stories that I might help bringing some of those mysteries to light. It was during one of my many mystery binges I came across a story of something known as the Hatman, a form of shadow person. I stumbled across a legend of these shadow people completely by accident by clicking through random links on Wikipedia. But it was the related article about the Hatman which piqued my interest greatly. It roused long dormant memories from the depths of my own mind, following an account of an encounter that I may now believe to be the Hatman. I don't recall how old I was, possibly 4 to 5 years of age, but it must have been quite a late night. At this point in time, my parents had retired for the night and the house was completely dark. The only source of light was a gentle wash of moonlight filtering through the thin curtains into my room. I was lying on the top bunk of my bunk bed my dad had made for me and my sibling, a younger sister, who had been sleeping soundly for several hours. It was nearly Christmas, and I was lying awake, pondering the complexities of the world that I have around me. I don't know if you guys used to do this, but oftentimes I'd find myself looking up at my ceiling onto these glow-in-the-dark stars that I had on the roof of it, and I would think just on how things would work and how things operated. In general, it was an interesting experience, but not one that I really have anymore, because I can just Google it and figure out how something works just by a simple Google search. Although, when I would think about film cameras, oftentimes I would just think about something like, oh, it was electricity that made it happen. Humor is humor. Although this night was Christmas and I was thinking mostly on what I would get. As I was staring at my ceiling, completely immersed in my own thoughts, I became completely aware of the feeling of a feeling just spreading through my own body. A chill went up the back of my neck, making my hair stand on end, and I had no idea why. If I had been close to falling asleep, at this point I was wide awake. I held my breath, laid alone still, straining to hear something that would give me a clue to what it was that had me on edge so suddenly. I heard nothing other than my sister's rhythmic, deep breathing from the bed below. When I could hold my breath no longer, I let it go as quietly and as quickly as I possibly could. I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary, so after a few more minutes of lying as still as a board, I decided to roll on my side and maybe see out of the bedroom door into the hallway. I did this in such a way that it would seem to anybody looking at me as though it was just simply rolling over in my sleep. I did this not because I felt I was in any real danger, but rather I did not want to risk getting an earful from one of my parents for not being asleep when I was supposed to be. As I completed my expert maneuver, I heard a noise in the hallway that sounded like a footstep, which was a relief. It was just my dad checking on something in the house. But as the footsteps drew near to the bedroom door, a wave of unease drew over me again. My dad was always very careful about being as quiet as you could possibly be, especially when walking around after lights out, so as to not wake anyone up. Listening to these particular set of footprints, I wondered if perhaps it was my mom, as the perpetrator seemed to be making no attempts to mask their sounds. I pondered this curiously as a figure emerged from the hallway and came to a stop in the doorway of my bedroom, and once again I found myself holding my breath, trying to be as still as possible. The figure stood in the doorway, breathing quite loudly. It was definitely a man, judging by the sound of the breathing, and for a few moments I relaxed, thinking that it was possibly my dad after all. I started breathing again and closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep, but the sound of breathing stayed in the doorway. I opened my eyes once again to look at the image before me. My blood ran cold. My dad did not out of habit just stand in doorways. And I opened my eyes again to take in the image before me. My blood ran cold. Also, my dad was nowhere near as tall as the figure in the doorframe. Nor did he wear or ever own a wide brim hat. I stayed as still as I could, hoping that the figure could not see that I was awake. With that monologue running through my mind, I was reminded of a line from the Christmas Carol. He sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. I smiled to myself. The figure in the doorway was Santa Claus, and clearly he was waiting for me. Of course! He was simply waiting for me to fall asleep so that he could deliver my presents, being such close to Christmas. I closed my eyes once more, ready to fall asleep, and once more I got that feeling of unease. The hairs on my neck stood on end once again. Something was not quite right, and something did not quite fit the conclusion that it was Santa Claus. Santa never wore a wide brim hat. Also, I was fairly certain that he is never depicted as a tall, broad-shouldered man with a slender figure. And the thing in the doorway definitely did not look or feel very Santa-ish at all. My eyes shot open again. I needed to figure out who was standing in the doorway. Even with the light filtering through the curtains, I could not make out very many details of this figure. Through the dim curtains, I could not make out any details whatsoever. My eyes had adjusted fairly well to the darkness, and I could possibly make out something about this figure, but whoever was standing in the doorway may as well have been a shadow. The only thing that told me it was not a shadow was the heavy breathing accompanying the figure. Just as I felt I could not lay still any longer, the shadowy figure took a long, deep breath, similar to and receded from the doorway, trying to melt away into nothingness. By this stage, a lot of the kids would have probably cried out to their parents, or at the very least thrown their covers over their heads, but I did neither of those things. Instead, I laid there pondering the mystery of the night. Christmas forgotten until I had fallen asleep. I remember asking both my parents the next day if they tried to pull some joke on me for not passing out when they told me I should have passed out. After all, it was Christmas. I knew that. And every time I prodded them about that, they reminded me that they had never been anywhere near my bedroom the previous night. I guess for a while, I just sort of shrugged it off, as though, after all, it did not happen again. Every now and again, the memory would spring to mind, especially during the nighttime ponderings. However, I thought I thought about it less and less as time went on, until I saw the picture accompanying the Wikipedia of the article of the Hatman. I'd almost forgotten about it completely till this very day. and I have no idea what it is. Whether it was one of my parents sleepwalking, or somebody who wasn't meant to be in the house, or a supernatural being or otherwise. But the picture of the Hatman was almost exactly what I remembered the doorway. And here is the illustration. Good luck sleeping, as he might be watching you. Safe. From my first memory, she was always there, pulling me out of harm's way. I was a curious child, and constantly was reaching for the hot stove or wandering outside unsupervised. Sometimes the harm she protected me from was my own father. Everything I said and did seemed to irritate him. Any loud noise, single word perceived as disrespectful, could earn a backhand across the face or a swift kick in the back that would send you flying down the steps. I clung to her tightly in those years, and she was my only constant. Never angry, never impatient of me, but just always full of love and hope. She stood between his hand and my fragile body, and I'm ashamed to say that I ran and hid more than once as he took his anger out on my poor dear mother. My grandparents lived across town and were anxious for me to get in an age where I could spend the weekend or the summer. Most little boys would get excited about a weekend at their grandparents' house, but I feared the time when I'd be forced to endure the hard, back-breaking summers my older cousins had seen. The grandparents thought that hard labor was the only way a boy could grow into a strong man. As they had a large farm to tend to, they made good use of those grandsons by raising them for the better part of their childhood. Usually starting at around 5 or 6, depending on the constitution of the boy. My cousin slept in a leaky barn out back, and, well, they existed on whatever scraps were thrown out at the end of the day. By the end of the summer, they permitted an odor that they may never wash off, an odor of sadness and pain. My female cousins lived inside the house, and they would never speak of the horrors that they may have endured. Women aren't really valued much in a traditional family, except for one thing. When I was barely 5, my mother woke me up in the middle of the night, covering her hand across my mouth and signaling for me to keep quiet. Her bruised face was wet with tears, and her hand shook me silently and begged me not to do anything to attract attention from my sleeping father. And without a sound, we snuck out of the house, taking only my stuffed teddy bear and leaving behind everything else I had ever known, which honestly at the time was not much. My mother and I kept to the back roads as our journey took us across several states to a house on a river, where her brother lived, making a small living as a schoolhouse teacher, and was a widow and had no children of his own. By the time we arrived at the door, we were weak from hunger and exhaustion. My mother hadn't stopped to sleep the whole way, too afraid that my father, or rather his family, would catch up, with her being completely unaware of what was going on. My uncle hadn't always lived there, and had only arrived a short few months before. And as my mother had not been permitted to keep contact with her family, she only knew of his location by a chance meeting of a distant relative who was simply selling some items in town. Even at my young age, I was able to understand what this meant. We weren't safe. They couldn't find us here. Suddenly, my world didn't look so bleak and depressing. I would no longer suffer my father's wrath by playing too loudly in the backyard or getting up to drink water after I was supposed to go to bed. I suppose that given my history, I should have been wary of this new man, but he exuded a calm demeanor and natural instincts, and he told me he would never hurt me. For 2 years, my mother and I lived in peace at my uncle's house by the river. My mother started working at a small shop in town, and I went to school with my uncle. At night, we would eat dinner in the small kitchen and talk about our day like a normal family. I spent my summers down by the river fishing or watching grass grow, and I developed a fast relationship with the boy down the road. And we'd never spent a weekend apart. Rather, it was riding bikes, playing in the woods with a stick, or it was just a sweet time and some of the best childhood memories a kid could ask for. But nothing lasts forever. My mother took ill in the winter, and I was 7. I was looking forward to Christmas and a break from the school and sleepovers, late night, marshmallow roasting, and all that. But my mother was so sick and got very sad. It seemed a week had passed where she went from happy to rosy to pale and then withdrawn in her bed. On the morning of the parade in town, I begged her to take me. My young mind didn't understand what the real sickness was. I had recovered nicely from the years spent with my father, and I was now blessed once again with the innocence of a selfish youth. My mother pulled herself together, and off we went. She held my hand and bought me some caramel popcorn at the stand. We laughed, giggled for a few minutes, and she appeared healthy and whole again. Then she fell. Right there, at the parade, in front of everyone. My sweet, wonderful mother, who had always protected me, fell to the pavement. I only stared in confusion. My mother was rushed into the hospital in the next town, and I squeezed into a corner and cried silently. And when the nurse came to me and asked me who my father was, what possessed me to utter his name? Why would I say his stupid name? Why wouldn't I say the name of my quiet uncle at the home at the river? Shock, perhaps confusion. I didn't understand why they're asking. I didn't know that they were asking who to call. So no, I answered, and off they went. The nurse pulled me into my mother's room, who quietly told me my father and my grandparents were both on their way to claim me. My father to comfort me, and my grandparents to take me back to their farm and stay. What a lucky boy you are! What many people love you. You'll be just fine. But you should stay with your mother for a few minutes and say your goodbyes. They'll be here shortly. Inside, I screamed of horror. I wanted to run away. I needed to get away and hide and get away from these miseries that were soon to come. But I couldn't leave my mother without saying a goodbye. As I held my mother's hand and let a silent tear fall onto her eyes, she smiled so sweetly and told me 2 words before she passed this world. You're safe. My mother passed of a stroke at midnight on December 18th, the year I was 7. I was curled up next to her body, and I didn't wake until my uncle scooped me up in his arms and carried me home. I didn't know what happened that day or how the fuck he even found me. I didn't understand anything at all, but all I knew is that I was safe because my mother had told me so. I grew up in that house by the river with my sweet, sweet uncle until I was about 10 or so. He met a nice lady from town, and they married and had 2 children of their own. I was raised as their other son, and I always was loved and cared for, or at least I got that impression when dealing with them. Although my new aunt could never replace my darling mother, she took care of me throughout my childhood and was never spoken a word of anger. Never did I. I never slept on a barn or lived off of scraps. Never did I have to duck and avoid fists coming in the dark. My first year in college, I became quite curious about what happened to change the events that were unfolding in my life on that awful night. And I did some research, and this is what I learned. At midnight, on December 18th, the year I was 7, my father was traveling from one place on his old blue pickup, and he had been working out of town when he received a message that his only son had been found. The pickup was old and in disrepair. Still, it was a surprise that at the stroke of midnight, his truck suddenly swerved into the path of an oncoming semi, and this killed him. The driver in the semi walked away, barely in a scratch, but my dad, he didn't live for, I would have to say, another 5 minutes after that. At midnight on December 18th, the year I was 7, My grandparents were traveling from their farm across town in their new car, purchased in the last year with the proceeds from the farm, and apparently the prostitution of several of their own granddaughters. They were at home when they received word that the grandson had been found. The car was new, and not the cheapest model. Therefore, the mystery of why at the stroke of midnight, the car suddenly pulled right while on a mountain road, causing the car to go through the weak fence and down into the ravine, causing my grandparents to drown. It was estimated that it took them up to about a minute to 3 minutes before they succumbed to lack of oxygen and, sadly, an influx of water going down their lungs. There were investigations to even into my sweet, calm uncle, as it was a little odd that both of these events were to happen at the exact same time my mother passed in the world. My uncle was never worried with me, and the investigators finally gave up as no one could prove how any of these could be linked or how it happened. It was just a odd, fucked up coincidence to their eyes, as my grandparents and my father were in two completely different areas, miles apart, meaning that it would have taken 2, maybe even 3 people to force such an event to happen. Because if it was to be linked, they would have to have coordinated it just so it would happen at the same damn time. That's just simply not likely. But rather, I know how it happened. I know. They didn't know a fucking thing because, I don't know. I feel that there's a more supernatural element behind this. I know how it happened, and I knew it when she uttered those 2 words to me. And those 2 words were, "You're safe." Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and I'm going to be trying to produce one creepypasta once a day or once every other day for now on. Of course, I won't be able to keep the schedule for, forever, but for as long as I'm no longer in school, I would like to try to provide you guys with more content. But this brings me to the most newest bit of information I'd like to bring to you. 1, if you like the 2 stories, would you please like, favorite, and possibly comment below, as it helps me a lot. Even if you don't normally comment or don't normally like a video, if you do that for me, it really will help the channel out and help the video get a little bit more popular, which helps me get a little bit more revenue. Second thing I would like to mention is that I'm debating on making a GoFundMe page, because I would like to buy some cameras and equipment so that next time Youmacon runs around, I can actually host a creepypasta panel and invite all of you lucky little demons to it. If you guys think this is a good idea and that I wouldn't look like a complete scumbag trying to fund a creepypasta panel at a few conventions, then go ahead and let me know in the comments. I'm not going to do so unless if I hear some feedback of yes or no. Secondly, what I would like to do is, like to direct you to 2 different videos. Another great video I did that you guys seem to enjoy a lot was the 10 more disturbing Let's Not Meet stories. And if you're not really interested into Let's Not Meet stories, the top 10 most disturbing places you can visit is also linked up there. Just click on the thumbnail of what you would like to watch, and you will be taken to it. If not, you always can support the show financially by going on to patreon.com. Even $1 helps out if you are willing to donate it. And finally, if you don't have any money and just really can't afford to watch any videos right now, you can always click that subscribe button and be alerted to when I do upload something. That way, you will never be out of the loop. This has been your host, That Creepy Reading, hopefully providing you quality content in the horror community. With that being said, signing off.